Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration. I'm your host, Stephen Peinecker, and glad to be rejoined by my friend Ed Goble, as I believe this is your third time here on Mormon Book Reviews. And
Might be fourth.
fourth, okay.
Not sure.
And yeah, maybe four now.
Hmm.
And you recently appeared on my show this summer, and you talked about your model, about your the dual model, Heartland model, was one of the things you talked about, and you also talked about your methodology. And there were some people that
Hmm.
criticized you, and you
Well,
felt
there
like,
was also specifically the Book of Abraham that was
oh,
more
that's right,
in
that's right,
terms of, where people are kind of going off on me in terms
right,
of, you know,
yes, that's right, that's right.
challenging.
Yes, yes, the Book of Abraham and your methodology, which is
Yeah.
interesting. And
Hmm.
I wanted you to come and you wanted the opportunity to kind of clarify and let people understand the methodology that you were using, and kind of push back on
Hmm.
some of the critics, what they were saying, and maybe
Yeah.
help so they maybe better understand where you're coming from. So, Ed, how you doing today?
Doing well.
Good,
Doing well. Yeah.
good, good. Well,
Um,
welcome back to the program.
yeah,
And
things are going pretty well.
good, good. Well, you wanted
Hmm.
to kind of just discuss and tell us some of your thoughts, so I'm just going to kind of open the floor here to you, and you can share what's on your heart. And you, I know you kind of prepared something here just to kind of outline your way of your methodology, and I want to give the opportunity on this platform so that you can say your piece.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, so this was, I didn't want to get into detail on this in that Book of Abraham video because I was focused pretty much on, okay, here's the outcome of the type of things that I'm working on. Here's where my line of inquiry has taken me, right? But then people like Dan Vogel and Colby Reddish and some other people were, just being very, I could expect somebody to be critical, but um, making assertions like, okay, well, this is no better than Nibley's type of apologetics, or this is no better than this or that, or and Colby Reddish went off on a certain thing that he said that kind of that I need to push back on very specifically. But so what I need to go into though is the basis of this, and you kind of have to start, with kind of the basics because so I made a statement because I was trying to allude to the type of things that Einstein would do, in his way of thinking. So, like, when he was first going into, developing special relativity and general relativity and all this kind of thing, he would use a process that that's called thought experiments, right? So those thought experiments sort of um, exist in their context in a box, where you're imagining sort of um, a reality that's that has certain that's contingent on certain things being true in that box, and that doesn't mean that you can prove that those things are true. As it is, you're kind of letting things play out. And so because I was trying to say, okay, I want to get into my methodology later. I want to get into the specifics of the methodology later. Colby turned around and kind of insulted me and said that I was, claiming to be like Einstein and all this. And I'm like, I got to push back on that. Sorry, that's not cool. And so, yeah, I just have to call that one out because I'm not going to be insulted in that way. So, anyway, so I need to establish legitimacy for my area of inquiry and show that I have a well structured methodology and show reasonability. I don't necessarily need to refute other people's claims at this point because the point is that I'm trying to present a way of thinking. I'm trying to present how these things play out. in that way of thinking. I'm not necessarily trying to say that there's lack of validity to their points of view, or that there's, or that somehow their points of view are not or cannot be valid, because instead of trying to invalidate somebody else, what this really is it's trying to say that these two things kind of exist without really having any, they don't really cross over. The point, the way you deal with them in your mind is just a different way of thinking for each one. Okay, so um so they try to invalidate my claims based on an observation that they ought not to have to actually acknowledge that my evidence act and that my claims actually work, and that they're coherent and logical and reasonable with their own sphere. And they try to define reason and reasonability solely materialistically for their own purposes. And so I need to go into a little bit of stuff as a background here. So you've got atheism, agnosticism, and theism. Agnosticism is kind of a live and let live thing. It's like not really committing to anything, but it's sort of a materialistic point of view. Atheism, on the other hand, is making claims that there is no God, claims that only materialism exists, trying to say that only science can be used to know anything at all, and that things that we truly know are only those things that can be shown by science, and that we never really know anything until science shows it to be true. And so they, as far as science goes, everything is that science deals with is in this sphere where materialistically claims can be falsified. It doesn't deal with things that are not falsifiable. And so while certain aspects of religious claims overlap into the scientific realms, what can really be said, though, is the fundamentals of a religious claim are unfalsifiable in terms of the present. Okay, that doesn't mean that aspects of those claims can't be falsified or so forth and tested as time goes on. And therefore, everything or anything that proceeds forth from this scientific claim at a certain point in time is not necessarily falsifiable by present science. It doesn't mean we don't want things to be falsifiable. It just means that in the present state, for example, you cannot falsify a restorationist testimony. It's something that they feel in their heart. It's something that they know in their mind. It's something that science can't really do anything with. It's either true or it's not true, but it's not something that science can really say is true or not true. Science can't say that I did not interact with this being that science cannot prove is real, right? And that my interaction with this being is not real. Interestingly, though, transhumanism is kind of like an area where things kind of cross over between, religion and materialism. Restorationism, or so-called Mormonism, is already very materialistic, and so where Lincoln Cannon and his group, the Mormon Transhumanist Association, they've come up with some concepts and so forth that kind of bridge that gap. For example, the new Mormon, or I'm sorry, the new God argument and things like that, kind of bring things into a more materialistic and make these things more plausible in terms of a purely um, materialistic kind of way of thinking. And a lot of the claims that Richard Dawkins made in his book, The God Delusion, while being a problem for certain religions, are not a problem at all for restorationist theology, because restorationist theology is fundamentally transhumanist in the
Well, let's
first
just
place.
be clear. I mean, when we say
Mm-hmm.
restorationists, in particular, you're saying the Church of Jesus
Yeah.
Christ of Latter-day Saints, because there's other groups that use restoration that may not embrace that cosmology.
Well, yeah, but I'm, I'm, um, I am not using the word Mormon because I don't use the word Mormon
Right,
very much,
right.
So if you want to,
You could use
yeah, for the,
LDS. Yeah, that's fine. But
yeah,
I,
LDS, whatever.
yeah. Okay.
But yeah, but I'm also, kind of for anything called Mormon, whether it's LDS or FLDS or whatever,
Mhm.
a lot of these things cross over into a lot of these other restorationist branches anyway.
Okay.
Right. So, um, I know that there's other religious movements that sort of, look at themselves as restorationist, but in terms of this
Right.
thing,
I get it.
that's established by Joseph Smith, right? So claims like Richard Dawkins would make, saying, such things like, if there was a God, if there was a real God, he would be something like, this sort of alien being that would be, that didn't that came forth, from kind of an evolutionary background, and that the reason that that being, um, you know, it can be considered a god, quote unquote, is because, um, you know, the level of technology, the level of, the society that being belongs to, and so forth, how far it's evolved and all this compared to us. He said, if you look at, that kind of being, you could be forgiven for, kind of thinking that they're godlike. You know what I'm saying? So in terms of, I mean, that's very descriptive of, particularly the Mormon belief, and I'll just go ahead and use the word, I guess, Mormon, concept of God, where even though the classic idea of, LDS, theology doesn't really go into evolution and so forth, a more mature, as I see it, a more mature view of LDS theology in the future ought to employ evolution. And I've talked about this on this channel previously. Um, so anyway, the point is, this kind of transhumanist way of thinking kind of sort of bridges the gap between, materialism and religion. So for LDS claims in particular about religion, it's not always just that, we're making religious claims. We're making claims that are consistent with a transhumanist kind of thinking. Even though, Joseph Smith came along a long time before transhumanist, philosophy and all this, it's still now, when look at the nature of Joseph Smith's, a lot of the concepts that he was teaching, they're very much in line with, the type of things that, transhumanism gets into. So now, um, to get into the problem that we have here, the basic problem is that, any claim that somebody makes about science is presentist. Is they're trying to claim that, we're going to make a judgment of the truth claims that something is making based on the presentist state of science, or the present state of science, right? And so That's a problem in terms of finality in these sort of dogmatic kinds of claims that people make, because um, reality doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way in science. It doesn't work that way just the way reality works. And I'm saying that, okay, we can come to a tentative kind of judgment if we want, but then that's subjective, because if you believe a certain way, then you're obviously going to say, okay, my philosophical background, maybe, let's say, if you were an atheist materialist, my philosophical background is that I'm going to judge you based on what I know right now according to the current state of science. But the current state of science, um, even though we've got, over time, we've got things like you know where science will overthrow itself at times in terms of some claim,
Yeah,
like, say, I don't know, just pick anything
right.
like,
Yeah, that's the thing about science is
yeah,
it's not stagnant or static. It
yeah,
continually is inquiring and making new discoveries and occasionally overthrowing the previously held view
yeah,
on a lot of different things. And so
yeah.
the question I have for you is that, if the scientific method operates that way, what are you saying that would conflict with just basically like what if you're using the term presentism, they're basically, I mean, I guess I'm trying to understand. They're basically saying, look, we can only know so much what science tells us. Outside of that,
Hmm.
it's no longer in the realm of science. And
Yeah,
so then it becomes something else. So the question then would
yeah.
be to somebody who takes that position, why should they be looking at your way of doing things? Like what would be your
because
selling point to them?
because what they're trying to do is they're not trying to engage with me. They're trying to shut me down. Okay,
Okay.
they're not trying to hear me. They're not trying to see the rationality. I'm
Okay.
not trying to prove anything. I'm
Okay.
trying to establish the legitimacy of a line of inquiry,
Okay.
or inquiry, however you want to say
Mhm.
that. I am trying to establish the rationality of my position as something that deserves attention in terms of seeing the claims for what they are, and how they play out in their context.
Okay. Okay.
So they're trying to shut me down. That's exactly what they're trying to do. And the mocking type of stuff, like this thing that Colby did to me, that's trying to shut me down. It's not trying to hear out the methodology. And I wasn't even trying to get into the methodology, but it's almost like he was trying to demand that of me at the time. And
Okay.
so I'm not trying to, like, say that people ought to believe as I believe. I'm trying to say that if you are going to, um, be even a just simply a nice person, and or just simply, allow, for this line of inquiry to, play itself out, um, then you ought to have a dialogue with me. You ought to allow, this to play out. I mean, I can't tell you, how, as I watched videos of Jeff Meldrum, for example,
Hmm.
who passed away recently.
Yes.
But he was a primatologist
Yep.
at ISU, right?
Mhm.
And but he was derided. He was, people were laughing at him all the time. People were, you know not taking him seriously. But the truth is, he brought Bigfoot research into kind of a scientific sphere,
Yeah.
in terms of being able to
He
say,
w- okay.
here is, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to just so everybody knows, Jeffrey Meldrum, and yes, it is related. He is a cousin to
Mhm.
Rod Meldrum,
Yep, yep.
and he was really like a person who was taking Bigfoot. He was applying the scientific method to the study of Bigfoot, and he got a lot of criticisms for doing that. and was mocked.
Mhm.
But I mean, but it's really it's an interesting guy, and of course, I'm one of those people. I would love it if there was a Bigfoot. So
Yeah.
I'm,
Now, this is
but
interesting
yeah,
because my side of it is that I no longer believe in Bigfoot, but that
okay,
doesn't mean that I'm going to, say
dismiss
that
his work.
Jeff Meldrum's line of inquiry, that there was somehow no rationality to it, right?
Right.
I'm not
Okay,
going to
I understand.
mock. I'm not going to
Okay.
mock his line of inquiry, but he had to fight his peers constantly
Yeah.
to be able to try to establish and show, hey, it doesn't matter if you believe in what I kind of believe. Look at what I'm doing and just allow it to play out. It doesn't mean that,
Okay.
you know what I'm saying,
Yeah.
and don't sit here and try to mock me and make me look like I'm not rational.
Right.
Don't make my line of inquiry appear that it's not rational and that it doesn't have a carefully established methodology,
Okay.
by
So
your mocking.
all right.
So
So now
that's,
keeping in
yeah.
mind, Ed, this is he's
Mhm.
not the only one that experiences. This happens
Oh
all
yeah,
the time
it,
in
it
the real world. So that
yeah, it's
in
all
the
over the
scientific
place.
community. So I think that that's just part of being part of the being in the public sphere, having these conversations. You're going to have people that are going to push back and be critical.
Oh, it
That's
is, and no, there's
that's
going to
going to
be a
happen.
bunch of people that don't agree or don't accept what I say here. But my
Right.
point is you guys have to understand just how carefully I've
Okay.
thought this out, and
So
you
I want.
can't just accuse me of
Okay.
saying that I didn't think this out very carefully, right?
Okay. Well,
And so this is what I'm trying to
okay.
show.
Fair enough. And so let's pretend
All right.
Colby's in this call, and you
Yeah.
can lay it all out to him, and
Right.
I'd be and just kind of just lay it all out for us.
Yeah. Okay. So now we get to Aristotle, right? So Aristotle dealt with what's called the future contingent problem, right? So in these Greek, um, you know, these debates and so forth, they noticed that everybody there was a dilemma where every statement they thought must be either absolutely true or absolutely false, right? And so they refer to this as the law of the excluded middle. there It's a denial of, this thing, that all possibilities in the middle, you know and in computer programming we call this Boolean logic, where something is either true or it's false, right? So a lot of the things that and I'm a software engineer, by the way. That's what I do for a living. So in that kind of thinking, you have an absolutely true or absolutely false. Well, the problem with that is, that you're excluding the middle, right? And how does that work? Well, because it's presentist, and Aristotle uh, realized that there's contingents based on the future. So the problem is, if something is already true today, let's say that there would, one example is that there will be a sea battle, right, today, and it's happening, right? The battle is already unavoidable because it's already happening. It's determined, right? Something in the future, on the other hand, right? Um, there isn't any sense of whether that's determined. Okay, but in quantum physics, a particle encapsulates both. Interestingly, it encapsulates um, both a true and a false at the same time, where actually you're in a state of um, word superposition. There we go. So you have a superposition of things being true and false at the same time, and so that field, so those possibilities are spread out, okay, in that field, I mean, and there's in quantum physics, there's many possibilities, but for the sake of argument here, I'm just trying to simplify, right? That we've got either something's true or either something's false, but that there's nothing determined today. The problem is that it's even in quantum physics that determinism is determined by when what they call the waveform collapsing, right? And that what that means is when all of those possibilities were spread out in that field, right? That um, all of those things were contained in that. Suddenly there's some kind of interaction in the present that causes that collapse, and that finally a particle takes on the attributes or the states where finally it's decided, right? Finally it says, okay, this is the finality and this is how it is, right? And so that's the collapse, and it's the same problem that Aristotle was dealing with, because future contingents, the maybes, okay, or the either ors, whatever you want to call them, are neither definitively true nor definitively false at the present moment, because they exist outside of the present moment. And therefore, there is effectively a veil to the future. There's effectively a veil over what's really happening in quantum physics in the present if the waveform has not collapsed yet. Okay, so effectively, and it doesn't matter, I don't need to like really argue if the present and the future and the past are really existent right now. That's not the point. I'm trying to argue something pragmatically. The future is not decided yet. Therefore, pragmatically, there are many possibilities. And, but in a statement where you're trying to say something is either true or false, then if you deal with that as a whole, and you provide for both possibilities, you don't run into the problem once once you come into that finality. Once you come to the point where there's finality, then both sides have kind of been provided for in argumentation, in theory, in everything. And so there's no strict bivalence. There's actually multivalence, where you're dealing with possibilities instead of trying to be dogmatic. You're dealing with those things all together. And in computer science, we call that the thing that encapsulates that. We call it a monad or a monad, depending on what you want to call it. It's a well-defined space in a computer, okay, that encapsulates the problem of whether something is it can either be true or false. And it's also can be represented in a flowchart. Computer programming deals with flowcharts. So you say, what's that diamond element there in your flowchart when you come to it? Well, it's a decision block. It's a decision element. Okay, it looks like a diamond, and it says, here's two paths. Okay, those two paths are provided for. Here's my path that says, if this is true, then I'm going this way. If this is false, then I'm going this way. So I'm not necessarily having to refute Colby and Dan to say, oh, look, if the future state says, once we come to it, that Mormonism is false. Oh, guess what? You guys already provided for the possibility and made those arguments for how we explain that, right? And so we're not trying to really come to finality by just saying that we're providing for that path and you guys have already chosen your path in terms of your beliefs, and so have I. But I acknowledge that your path, uh, in terms of the possibility that you've provided for, I don't have to do that work because you did it. I don't have to go there in terms of, you know, saying that here's a possible path for how that can be dealt with. You people have already done that.
Okay.
But you're trying to shut me down and say that because when I try to go on this path, you're trying to shut me down and say that I can't go on that path and that that possibility shouldn't be provided for because you're trying to say that I don't have legitimacy and that I don't have reasonability and that I can't establish the legitimacy of my path because what I believe is not what you believe. That's absurd because I'm trying to provide for a possibility, and it doesn't have to be true yet. Or at least it doesn't have to be, known to be absolutely 100% known to be true yet. And so that the state of whether it is or not is going to be decided by some future state of things. And so this goes back to, apologists love to avoid anachronisms and like to try to explain them away and stuff. I'll go ahead and say, you know that anachronisms exist in terms of, that they're in the text of the Book of Mormon, they're in the text of the Book of Abraham, but I don't have to use the word anachronism in terms of like something that is known to be false and known to be out of place, in terms of, that in the present state of things we think that it's out of place because it just doesn't fit, and it seems like it belongs in some other time period or something. What that really means is that you're making a presentist argument and a presentist judgment based off of what you think is how the past ought to be seen in terms of present state of science. So you're trying to um, cast judgment on the claim when the claim is actually what it actually turns out to be is that it's a prediction.
Okay.
It's a prophetic prediction because if the Book of Mormon is true, then what a seer saw in the past is actually a prediction of what is going to be possibly found in the future.
Okay.
And so that so-called anachronism is actually not
Hmm.
something to be judged. It's something to be put in terms of it's something in this, on if you look at again the flow chart, it's on this side of the argumentation, and it's something that has not been determined yet. So therefore, true and false isn't really all there is here. This is like you guys need to recast your understanding of how the apologetic inquiry and the apologetic reasonability actually interacts with the critical uh, um, inquiry and line of thinking, because we're actually we're actually providing for two sides of the debate, and the debate is not final. It doesn't matter what you say. It just simply is not final. So I'm not going to sit here and be shut down in my line of inquiry just because you guys don't believe in what I believe. I'm going to go ahead and establish my line of inquiry as something legitimate, and I'm going to provide understanding for it, and I'm going to show how it plays out in an
Okay.
Einsteinian thought process, where we're going to say, okay, for the sake of this, we're going to say that in this box is going to play out this way, and this is how my claims and my evidence plays out and is explained by that line of inquiry and that line of reasonability.
Okay.
So now, um, now we get to bracketing, okay, and Benjamin. Oh, I'm spacing his last name.
Benjamin Park. Or
Park.
yeah. Yeah.
He explained this concept very clearly on his channel. Okay, bracketing is something done by well-trained and serious historians. Okay, and so this is something very, very, you know, fundamental to their methodology. And anybody that's being absolutely fair ought to get a hold of this and employ it in their thinking. Somebody that's not going to try to shut down their or somebody that like me, where they're trying to just say, oh, you're an apologist, and so you're just doing theology, you're not doing science. Well, that isn't really true. I'm trying to, as best as I can in my flawed way, implement a kind of something like the scientific method as close as I can come in this area of inquiry as best as it could be done. Now, you can't totally judge a psychologist, for example, harshly for not being able to, totally get inside somebody's head, because yet they employ things that they know are possibilities, like Freudian, this, and Jungian that, and so forth. They're all, you know they're going to go out and try to draw on whatever kind of research they can get, and it's all kind of squishy in psychology. That it's as scientific as it could be in the state that they're that where things play out. Okay, and the same thing with M theory and you know the string theory and so forth. There's a lot of criticism because um, that's done mostly by theoretical physicists and physicists that deal with things where the rubber meets the road in experimental physics. I mean, they're always very critical of string theorists and M theorists and so forth, because because the math works out, but they haven't been able to test it in the real world yet. So I challenge, these assertions where people are trying to shut me down just because, the finality of things in my line of inquiry will be something in the future, and people are trying to shut it down with their presentism. I take issue with that, and I challenge that. And so, bracketing, coming back to that, bracketing, like I say, is a tool in the historian's toolkit. It's traced back to the philosophical tradition of phenomenology in the 20th century. It's a 20th century movement, and so they had the notion of suspension of judgment in trying to help researchers manage their subjectivity and bias when analyzing a phenomenon. And so, particularly in Mormon studies, where historians, are effectively observers, and they're trying to go, oh, this is what I see, let me document that. Well, so even 10 minutes ago, 20 minutes ago, a year ago, I had a year ago practically, I had there's a book that I'm trying to get published on the Book of Abraham, but it's actually now going to be split out in 3 different volumes. um, Point being that I'm bringing that up is that's history now. Okay, and so maybe in the future, Mormon studies historians are going to go, hey, um, that we should know about that. We should have that documented. Gee, isn't it too bad that nobody took Ed Goble seriously enough to actually document his claims? to actually study and observe what was going on. Because yeah, okay, maybe most people think that, my work is only deserving of maybe a few footnotes here and there, but maybe in 100 years, if I'm right, then maybe Mormon studies historians at that point will go, gee, it's too bad that people didn't bracket and actually suspension of the judgment that was trying to shut him down and allow him to have enough legitimacy of his area of inquiry and enough, you know, acknowledgement of his reasonability and so forth, that, to acknowledge the fact that he actually does have a well thought out methodology. Just because we don't agree with it, oh, hey, well, maybe it really is well thought out. See what I'm saying? So these guys would rather just, just treat me like I'm an idiot. Okay, so they're just trying to say what they say to shut things down. But I tell you that, um, you know, my work is very serious. I do reverse engineering in my work as a as the type of scholarship that I work and the type of research that I do. I do a lot of linguistics in that. And yeah, okay, everybody, and I do a lot of stuff that goes delving deep into Egyptology and stuff, and people try to challenge, they always try to bring up the credentials thing. They always try to do all this and that. But the reason that people are not on my side right now is because I'm the pioneer.
Okay.
And because I'm the pioneer, the evidence has taken me way out here where the critics are here, the apologists are here, but I'm here.
Okay.
And so I see certain claims of the critics as being correct or valid. I see certain claims of the apologists as being valid. And it's interesting to see that, um, in my line of inquiry that I'm establishing, that is kind of apologetic in nature, but nothing like it, because I'm not doing the thing like John Gee and these other people try to do, where they try to, you know, evade evidence. And I didn't say it in my other video, but I'll say it now. This whole special pleading thing of, on the Kirtland Egyptian papers, where people are trying to say that W.W. Phelps and, these other scribes are responsible for the contents and the translations in the Kirtland Egyptian papers. Well, hey, guess who's really right about that? It's the critics who are right about that, and the historians that are the objective historians, like, um, there's a whole list of them. I don't want to get too off track on this, but my point being is that my point of view actually takes seriously certain claims of the critics, certain claims of the apologists, and it's putting those things, circumscribing it into the one great whole, so to speak, because Brigham Young said, you know, anything that's true, we ought to believe it, whether it's from heaven or from hell. So, I mean, I need to try to wrap this up. So, bracketing, like I say, originated outside of the historian's sphere of things, and it's been adopted and adapted by qualitative research methodologies, especially, like I say, in historical studies, and to primarily to try to get people to at least kind of view things as an observer, instead of trying to cast judgment and all this, and try to shut down things that they don't like and so forth. That is exactly what is happening when people try to censor me and try to keep me from um, being able to, when they shut me down, they're trying to censor me. When the
Okay, well,
apologists shut me down, they're
so
trying to censor me.
just so
Yeah,
you know, I mean, you're on my platform, and I'm not censoring,
sure.
and
Oh,
you
I
are
know, but I'm just trying
right.
to say,
But I'm saying is
yeah.
that you're not being shut out to the point that you're not able to get your message out there. As a matter of fact, you're going to have those books published. So in
Oh,
one
yeah.
sense, be able to get this stuff out there. Um, but there are going to be people there, anytime you enter into the public sphere and make claims or, or a different maybe worldview or a different way of looking at things, there is inevitably going to be pushback, but that doesn't
Oh, yeah.
stop you from being able to, do what you want to do and get it
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But, I'm just trying to wrap this up real quick because
Okay.
I'm trying to be, you know, good with your, not taking all your time.
Okay.
But it's interesting that, one of the specific things that this historian does with bracketing is they try to avoid presentism. And by that, in that case, they're trying to avoid judging the past by present day standards. Okay. Well, there so with the claims of apologetics where the future state of things is really what's going to decide whether things have um, you know whether they're solid or not, whether they're true or not, is actually the future state of science. Okay. And so it's interesting that the critics are trying to judge things with the presentism, things that are actually decided in the future by the presentism of this dogmatic finality that they're trying to make by saying that the scientific state of things in the present is adequate to make a judgment on the claims of um, you know, a certain line of inquiry like this. See, so in other words, it has a similarity there. Okay. So, just kind of to tie this all together, or at least this part, and I'm going to just spend 5 minutes saying, how this all applies to the book of Abraham and everything, because this is kind of like a foundation stone, so to speak. Here, I'm not even trying to get into that, but I'm trying to just kind of build the foundation stone on which the rest of this kind of lies. Stephen Jay Gould made an argument called non-overlapping magisteria, where he was arguing that science and religion are separate domains with no overlap, and that science addresses the empirical world, the factual how type of thing, while religion deals with the questions of moral value and ultimate meaning, kind of the why of things. And so his approach there with NOMA, or non-overlapping magisteria, was to try to reduce conflict by kind of defining these distinct areas of inquiry, right? And there we go, distinct areas of inquiry with different methods for resolution. And so apologetics, by its very nature, can only be scientific in terms of being informed by science. It can't be entirely scientific because some of its claims are religious claims. Some of its claims use as their foundation, in some cases, truth claims. And so this kind of idea is useful, um, in terms of saying, okay, here's these different kind of domains, but I don't really entirely buy into that because there's a lot of overlap in um, where some of the things that you know Book of Abraham apologists, for example, draw on is, they're informed by science, or they try to be. So there is some overlap, And in terms of biblical um, claims of creation and so forth, people like me that believe in evolution primarily, we look at, or at least some of us anyway, we try to say, okay, you know, we know that the scriptures are true in terms of their general claims that Adam and Eve were real, Noah was real, all of these prophets are real, David, Solomon, everybody, you know and some people try to say, okay, we're going to extend out the timeline further into the past, into the younger Dryas, where there was like clear flooding and everything on a in different places like North America and so forth and so on. Like my brother, he kind of believes in that, and trying to cast Noah's flood back 10 or 12,000 years ago. I don't agree with that, but my point being is that we're not trying to symbolize away things, but we're trying to acknowledge the fact that um, a lot of the language in the scriptures is figurative. Okay, and we're trying to say that um, we believe that these historical figures actually lived, and a lot of the stuff that is historical in the scriptures are actually true. But then we have to realize that somebody in the Bronze or Iron Age were being taught things in terms of that had to be sort of mythologized and symbolized in a certain way, to that the Lord was trying to teach them in their own language, and the way, to the degree that they would be able to understand in their time period the atonement of Jesus Christ, and that the reality and the historicity of the scriptures is what's important. It wasn't time until the 21st century for these to understand actually how things came to be in the creation, that the God's hand in the creation in terms of directed evolution, and all this kind of stuff is actually the reality. And so to bring this back to the book of Abraham, okay, the book of Abraham lies on this other path from this true and false reality. In terms of the present time, we've got something where we've got representations of two different paths, and the apologetics fulfills for one side of that reality in terms of what in terms of being able to provide a path for each side of the debate as it is right now. The critics, on the other hand, provide for the other side of the debate. And the legitimacy of either path is about providing for, like I say, the rationality and the legitimacy of a line of inquiry. Okay. It's not about you're right, I'm wrong at this stage of the game. Okay. So this is why, when I go off on Book of Abraham apologetics, you ought to be charitable about my rationality. You ought to give me the benefit of the doubt that I'm a rational human, and that my IQ is probably at least as high as yours. Okay, and that I'm not a stupid idiot, and that I have not very, very carefully um, thought out my methodology. All the rest of my methodology will have to be kind of dealt with, at different times. But, so this has to be kind of the first episode, so to speak, of where I talk methodology, because these are, it doesn't mean that I totally buy into, non-overlapping magisteria, because it's got its problems and all that. But if you can understand how it plays in with flowchart logic, how it plays with monadic structures in computer science, how it interplays with the reality of things, how they actually are in quantum physics, and how all of these have a likeness, how bracketing actually helps us understand each other, helps us understand the paths that we've taken in our paths of inquiry, and how we should be charitable enough to realize that everybody is a rational human, and to stop this kind of judgment in terms of not allowing somebody to actually be taken seriously. Okay, so this is my argument of why the foundation of my apologetics ought to be taken seriously. I don't care if you argue with it. I don't care if you believe it. I don't care if you find fault with it. You should realize that this is a carefully thought out foundation, and that this isn't just me saying, oh, well, I'm just going to go defend the church. No, I'm actually trying to solve the problem of the Book of Abraham. I actually have solved the problem of the Book of Abraham. I actually have solved the problem of the Book of Abraham. Okay, and I've drawn upon some things that the critics have shown, and some things that the apologists have shown, and some things that and gone places that neither have gone. Okay, so I don't care if you agree with me. I expect you to take me seriously enough to grant legitimacy to my line of inquiry, and grant me to be a rational human that can reason through very difficult material, and that can come to a rational and logical um, um, conclusion about that, whether you agree with it or not.
Okay.
So that's all I have to say.
All right. Well, Ed, I just want to thank you so much for
Yeah.
coming on today. When are those books going on the Book of Abraham? When do you expect those to be published?
Um, I just, I can't get enough of um, research in this area. I can't get enough of presenting on it and so forth. But I'll tell you, for the last 9 months, I got sick of it, and I had to take a break. And so I'm working on other books right now. Just like I, I the book that I sent you, that's my rewrite of my book on Book of Mormon geography that came out. This book was written in 2005, round about that time period, but this is a rewrite of it. The title's changed, and so yeah, it's dual heartland theory, or wow, I'm messing up my own title. Dual heartland theory of Book of Mormon geography. So yeah, I sent that book to various people. Steve was one of them that I sent it to,
Mhm.
and yeah, I was kind of presenting that at the firm conference. I was also presenting on the Book of Abraham at the firm conference. Rod Meldrum and Ryan Nelson, you know, getting to know those guys better. They're really awesome guys. I don't care what anybody says. I don't have to agree one bit with the universal model, or young earth creationism, or the heartland model. Even though I had a hand in it, in the creation of the heartland model,
Mhm.
I don't need to agree with it to be able to have a good relationship with those guys. And they told me I could present, so I did. And I took advantage of that opportunity because you know um, of how badly I've been treated in other, by other organizations and so forth. And so um, I don't care what anybody says about Rod. He's an awesome guy. So
Yeah.
that's, you
Well,
know,
I'm glad you've been able to
yeah.
share these things at the Firm Foundation conferences, and you do have an audience, and you do have people that are paying attention to your work, And
Mhm.
I don't want to you shouldn't feel discouraged just because there's
Oh,
people
I
there.
yeah, I
The
mean, I feel discouraged on occasion,
Yeah,
but
but
I'm not gonna I'm not going to be silenced by the criticism. I'm going to push back on the criticism. I just don't care what anybody thinks. I'm going to finish this, but again, it just kind of has to be decided by, the future in terms of, I mean, I've had, family health problems and so forth and, issues, blah, 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 blah. But, and also, like I say, I got sick of it for a while. I just had to go leave it as it was. I mean, one thing that I did was I copyrighted it formally so that people, couldn't come and try to say that, they came up with my ideas, especially because I've been presenting some of it, and who knows who could try to, whatever. But I made sure that it was copyrighted, and so yeah.
okay.
Um,
Well, Ed, I want to thank you so much for coming on. We'll have you
yeah.
back on also to talk about your latest book, and then when you have your Book of Abraham stuff, we'll have you come on and talk about those as well. I'm glad you're able to come on today and have this conversation here at Mormon Book Reviews. You have any final words, or you pretty much feel like you've said what I need?
I mean, like I say, this is just the foundation, and I wanted to be respectful of Steve's time. I only wanted to use an hour at this point. There's a lot more to it, um, and any decipherment is a decipherment, and it requires a, if the way things are the way they currently are understood, sometimes you got to go here and there, and then, to draw upon different things. And, you know, people make accusations, oh, this has nothing to do with that and the other. No, it totally does. It's one great whole. I brought it together. Okay. It's all rational. It doesn't matter what you say about it. It doesn't matter if you agree with it. It's my line of inquiry. It doesn't matter if I invented parts of it. Pioneers have to do what they have to do. Okay. So that's all I have to
Okay.
say.
Great,
Yeah.
awesome. Well, folks, let's see. I'd like to hear in the comments what you thought of today's episode. If you have any questions or anything you want to ask Ed, of course, he will engage you in the comments as well. Ed, do you have an email address that people can reach you at as well if they have any questions about
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah. It's KOKOBIM@gmail.com.
okay,
It's
and
just
we'll
the stars in Hebrew.
okay. So
Kokabim.
Uh,
Yeah.
okay, so I'll make sure I have that link to that email in the
Yeah.
description as well for those of you who'd like to reach out to Ed. We do have links in the description for those of you who'd like to financially support us. Really appreciate all of you for helping us out. Couldn't do it without you. And remember, the most important thing is this: all the voices of the restoration will be heard here on Mormon Book Reviews.